She was just loading the Apache's ammo, until the pilot saw the classified tattoo and froze. The worry of the Apache's rotors filled the air, creating a backdrop of mechanical music to the young woman's focused movements. She worked swiftly and methodically, each movement betraying years of training and experience. Her fingers, nimble and sure, loaded the rounds into the weapon system with a precision that bordered on the mesmerizing. Her name was Sarah, and her role in this mission was simple: load the ammunition for the attack helicopter. But as the minutes ticked by and the ammo racks were filled, an unexpected disruption was about to enter the scene. At the controls of the Apache sat Captain James Anderson, a decorated veteran with nerves of steel and eyes that missed nothing. As he observed Sarah's work, his gaze was distant, his mind already mapping out their attack strategy for when they got closer to the enemy lines. He had complete trust in his crew and their abilities, but that didn't mean he wasn't paying attention. And then something caught his eye, something that made him turn his head slowly towards Sarah, breaking the silence of the cockpit. There, on her left arm, peeking out from beneath her sleeve, was a tattoo, a symbol that sent a jolt of surprise through him. It wasn't just any symbol. It was a classified military icon, one that represented an operation so top secret it was known only to a handful of people within the armed forces. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the tattoo, trying to piece together how it could be there and why. The symbol was more than just ink on skin. It was a signifier of authority, of knowledge, of a clearance level that most soldiers never saw, let alone bore on their bodies. James wrestled with his surprise, wondering how he'd missed it before. Had she been working on this mission from the start? And if so, why was someone with knowledge of such a high-level operation working on a seemingly simple task like loading ammo? He couldn't recall ever seeing that tattoo before, yet its familiarity pricked at his memory banks. Suddenly, he remembered a briefing from 3 months ago, a mission that went off the grid, its details locked away in the highest levels of military intelligence. Could this be the link? Could Sarah know more than she was letting on? The implications hit him like a physical blow. If she did, who was she really working for? And what did it mean for the mission at hand? His mind raced, trying to reconcile the friendly, competent soldier he thought he'd hired with the potential operative he was now suspecting. But Sarah seemed oblivious to the turmoil she'd caused in James's mind. She continued her work with unwavering focus, her movements precise and efficient. The thought struck him. Was she doing it on purpose? Was she trying to send a message? James shook his head, trying to clear it. Paranoia wouldn't help anyone. He needed facts, not assumptions. But the questions gnawed at him. Who was she? Why did she have that tattoo? And what did it mean for the mission? He couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. They were close to their target and every second counted. But his eyes kept drifting back to Sarah, to the tattoo that now seemed like a beacon, drawing his attention and raising his suspicions. The moment stretched, the silence in the cockpit becoming deafening. Finally, James broke it, his voice betraying none of the turmoil in his thoughts. "Sarah, can you come here for a minute?" She looked up, startled, and then nodded, rising from her seat and walking toward the front of the chopper. As she approached, James gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit down." She did as she was told, but her eyes remained on him, a mix of confusion and apprehension in their depths. James took a deep breath, searching for the right words. How could he broach the subject without causing panic or worse, blowing her cover? "I need to ask you some questions," he began, keeping his tone even. "About that tattoo on your arm." Her reaction was immediate. She flinched, her hand instinctively going to cover the symbol. "What about it?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of defensiveness. James hesitated. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between her loyalty to her mission and her natural instincts for self-preservation. "Why do you have it?" he pressed, knowing full well the answer could change everything. A tense silence followed. The rotor's hum was the only sound, amplifying the weight of the moment. It felt like an eternity before Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It's nothing. Just a tattoo." Her response did little to quell the storm of questions in James's mind. He could sense she was hiding something, and that realization tightened his grip on the controls. "Nothing," he repeated, the word heavy with disbelief. "That's classified. Shouldn't have it." Her eyes widened in alarm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I have a tattoo. It doesn't mean anything. James wasn't buying her explanation, but he knew he couldn't press her further. Not now. He had to make a decision. Trust her or blow the whistle. Report her and risk losing her as an asset, if indeed she was one. He looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see through her facade. He saw fear now, yes, but also loyalty, competence, and a determination that was hard to read. Slowly, cautiously, he decided to take a leap of faith. He would trust her, at least for now. There was no time to waste on doubts or suspicions. They were about to go into action, and lives, both friend and foe, would hang in the balance. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm but kind. "Let's get to work." Sarah's shoulders visibly relaxed, and a wave of relief washed over her. In that moment, James knew he'd made the right call. As they geared up for the mission, the tension in the cockpit eased, replaced by a grim determination. James, Sarah, and the rest of the crew prepared for action. They ran through their checklists, double-checking their weapons, their gear, and their communication systems. Each crew member moved with precision, their movements a testament to their training and experience. In the back of the helicopter, Sarah buckled herself in, her hands steady on the controls. Beside her, the other crew members did the same, their faces grim, their eyes focused. As they lifted off, the Apache roared into the sky, its powerful engines driving them upwards. The wind whipped around them, the world shrinking beneath them. Soon, the target was in sight. Through the scope, James watched the landscape unfold, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of where their quarry might be hiding. The mission was in full swing, and every second counted. Sarah, meanwhile, was alert, her senses heightened. She scanned the horizon, her eyes trained on the ground below. She was ready for anything. As they moved closer to the target, the stakes rose. The danger was palpable, a tangible thing that hung in the air between them. Yet the crew remained focused, their teamwork and trust in one another holding them steady. Through the chaos of the mission, James kept an eye on Sarah, not because he suspected her, not anymore, but because he was aware of the burden she might be carrying. He saw the intensity in her eyes, the way her jaw was set, the slight tremor in her hands, betraying the turmoil within. He knew now that she was more than just a soldier, that she was a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit, a mystery he couldn't solve from where he sat. As the mission raged on, so did the battle in James's mind. He grappled with his feelings of distrust, trying to reconcile them with the reality of their situation. He needed answers, but he also needed Sarah's help. And so he made a decision. He would keep his suspicions at bay for now, focusing on the mission at hand. But once they were done, he would get to the bottom of this. When the dust settled and the mission was complete, they landed. The Apache touched down heavily on the ground, its blades stirring up a whirlwind of dirt and debris. As they emerged from the helicopter, James wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room. "Sarah," he started, his voice serious, "we need to talk." She nodded, her expression grave, her eyes meeting his directly. Together they walked away from the others, seeking privacy as they began what was to be a long overdue conversation. The Apache loomed behind them, a silent witness to the revelation that was about to unfold. "What are you really here for?" James asked, his voice low, his eyes intense. For a moment silence hung between them, heavy and expectant. Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her shoulders slumped. "I had to lie to you." James felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by a wave of understanding. He knew what it was like to keep secrets, to live a life where trust was a luxury one couldn't afford. "Why?" he asked, the question echoing the turmoil in his mind. "Why did you keep this from me?" Sarah looked up, her eyes pleading. "I didn't want to scare you," she whispered, "or the others." Her answer hung in the air, leaving James more confused than before. "Scare us?" he echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. "Would having a tattoo scare us?" Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "This tattoo," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not just any symbol. It's a symbol of an organization, a covert organization." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had a feeling he already knew what she was going to say, but he needed to hear it to believe it. "Is it possible?" he whispered, the word hanging between them. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said, her voice cracking. I was sent to gather intel, to observe you, to assess your readiness for the mission. Her words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of him. He stumbled back, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew, everything he trusted, suddenly seemed shaky and unsure. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, trying to reconcile the soldier he'd worked with, the brave, competent soldier he'd admired, with the operative she now revealed herself to be. Why? He whispered again, the question echoing the turmoil in his soul. Why are we being watched? Why me? Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Her apology fell on deaf ears. James was lost in his own thoughts, wrestling with the shock of discovery, trying to understand why he'd been chosen, why they'd all been chosen. He felt betrayed, used, manipulated. The trust that had been the cornerstone of his career was shaken to its core. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows around them, James found his voice. Need answers, he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil within. I need to know who's behind this, why we've been targeted. Sarah reached out, her hand trembling, but he flinched away, unable to bear the touch, unable to trust even that. I want to know, he said, his eyes boring into hers, and I think you should tell me. Sarah looked down, her shoulders slumping under the weight of his gaze. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice breaking. I can't tell you. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the rising panic within him.
Hi,
he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Why can't I tell him? She looked up, her eyes filled with tears. Because, she whispered, it's not my place. He searched her face, trying to find a sign of deception, but all he saw was sorrow and regret. With a trembling hand, Sarah reached out as if to touch him, but pulled back when he flinched away. Look, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her apology hung in the air between them, a hollow echo of remorse. James wanted to believe her, he truly did. But the trust that had been the bedrock of their relationship, the trust that had allowed him to lead his crew, his men and women who'd put their lives in his hands, that trust had been shattered. He looked at Sarah, her face pale, her eyes filled with unshed tears. And in that moment, he made a decision. Sarah, he said, his voice surprisingly calm, you need to leave. She blinked, her gaze flickering with surprise. What? She whispered, her voice betraying a hint of panic. You need to get out of here, he said, taking a step back. Before they realize you're compromised. Her lips trembled, forming words he couldn't hear. He knew she was pleading, begging him to understand, to believe her. But he couldn't, not now. Not when the fate of his mission, perhaps the fate of lives, hung in the balance. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. But I have to. She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then slowly, as if in a dream, she turned and walked away. With each step, she seemed to fade, disappearing into the shadows, taking with her the mystery of her true allegiance. As she walked away, James felt a profound sense of loss. He realized he'd lost more than just a comrade. He'd lost a piece of his soul, a piece that had believed in honor, duty, and above all, trust.